Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this Earth Day, the 22nd of April. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with the very latest weather information from the National Weather Service around Alaska. You can go to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. Give us a call on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. Find us on Twitter, on Facebook, and on YouTube during the day. And in between your Alaska Weather TV shows there, you can find information on YouTube, for example, during the afternoon. Get a daily afternoon map briefing about 3:45 to around 4 o'clock. And of course, you can get the full broadcast of what you're watching right now anytime at alaskapublic.org. In the evening hours, you'll get the latest cast up to date there. Or if you go to YouTube, type in the search bar AKWX TV for the broadcast there as well, hosted by our broadcast partners here at Alaska Public. Here's a look at the flood potential created today across all of Alaska from the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center. You can see the address there at the top of the screen. Below average runoff is expected there across south central and southwestern Alaska, with low to maybe even low moderate flood potential right now in villages there along the Kuskokwim. You get up in the Yukon and not expecting really above average or below average of runoff expected along the main stems of the Yukon or the Tanana at this point. And above average runoff is expected across the coastal plain and some of the northern rivers, including the Colville. You can see some areas there closer to Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse looking at slightly elevated village flood potential around low to low moderate. So no villages right now expecting any serious flooding conditions. The breakup map was updated again today. You can find all of this information on the website. If you go to the breakup section on the left-hand side of the screen, you can stay up to date with any changes. And as we get into more of that breakup mode, probably see some more rapid updates during the day, sometimes several times during the day, and that's when you get the timestamp there at 1:30. Along the upper Kuskokwim, you can see some areas are not really known just yet. A little bit opening there across some of the upper Kuskokwim valleys there, and then also across the middle and upper Tanana. Perhaps some breaks in the ice there. So breakup, maybe some hints of beginning here soon. So keep up to date with this map, aprfc.arh.noaa.gov. And of course, we'll pass on the information here on Alaska Weather as well. Here's a look at the satellite picture out to the west. The ridge of high pressure is in charge of mainland Alaska right now, and things are fairly nice across most areas. In fact, almost cloud-free across most of mainland Alaska. The exceptions, of course, when you get out across the west coast and across the Bering Sea. Low pressure is in charge out here. You can see that spiraling shape across the central parts of the chain, spiraling in some colder weather across the north and the western parts of the Bering, and keeping most of the activity well south of the chain. And with these storms progressing from west to east and bypassing Alaska, it's really nothing but a very mild and warm pattern for most of the mainland, and slowly grazing some precipitation across southeastern sections of Alaska. So the most active weather right now across the chain, moving into southwest, including the Alaska Peninsula, and eventually Kodiak Island as this boundary kind of rotates a little bit farther north and east. We're across southeast right now. You can see just a few clouds working in across British Columbia and then sweeping into the southern parts of the Panhandle. Across the coastal plain and the northwestern sections of Alaska, you'll notice a few more clouds there, perhaps a few areas of snow showers as you get up around the Chukchi Seacoast. We saw some of that around Atkasuk earlier today. Cold Bay, False Pass, areas around Unalaska saw some light precipitation. Barrow today made it up to 14 degrees, while the warmest spot in our state at Haines was closing in on 60. Thanks to high pressure sitting across the northern Gulf, you see a relatively cloud-free day there across really all of the Gulf Coast until you get out around Kodiak Island. Many areas there will see increasing clouds as we head through tonight as an occluded front sits to your southwest. Winds still blowing in from the south and east and keeping you warm. The frontal boundary will get a little bit closer tonight. There's not a lot of moisture really wrapped into the system, certainly not a lot of it falling out. And out around Shemya this afternoon, we did see a few snow showers, and again, some of those up across the coastal plain as well. Looking at the map for tonight, spotty areas of rain and snow showers may be found around the Copper River Basin. Northern parts of southeast looking at a little bit better chance for rain with the current temperatures there. A cloud-free night it looks like for south central, and a large part of south central, southwest, and the interior should be pretty much mostly clear. Now up across the north, look for a few spotty snow showers, some of that reaching Barrow as you've seen today. Around the Bering Strait and into the Bering itself, a widely scattered area of rain and snow showers will mix, and some of that will start to pick up, especially after midnight for eastern parts of the Aleutian chain, including on Alaska and Dutch Harbor. Heading into tonight, high pressure still in charge of the Gulf, but again with the moisture trapped in there, you may see some spotty areas of rain across the northern parts of southeast, and rain and snow may mix across the Copper River Basin, but nothing serious it looks like. For the central and western parts of the Brooks Range, expect rain and snow with that mix primarily south of the summits. The colder weather, of course, still trapped up north. And across the southern Bering Sea, rain and snow showers may be passing around, circulating around the low pressure at 994 millibars. Stronger storms developing out to the south and west. That's already down to 988 millibars south and west of Adak. And as we get into Thursday, you'll see that rapidly moves to the north and east and is deepening to 978 millibars. That should enhance the opportunity for rain and snow showers to be scattered across the Bering. We'll see a better chance for some rain showers across south and western Alaska, including places like King Salmon, Dillingham, and looks like probably Bethel as well, and Kodiak looking at a chance for some rain showers. There may be a few across south central around the Mat-Su valleys and into Eagle and Northway. The farther north you go, though, there's still plenty of dry air and probably even a clear sky there for Fairbanks, points west toward Ambler and Bettles. Southeast still catching a break with high pressure just offshore, but you'll start to see some effects of low pressure working its way north and west from British Columbia up around Haida Gwaii, and that means places like Heidelberg, Ketchikan, and Annette probably looking at an increased threat for some light rain, and some of that still lingering around Haines and Skagway, maybe even Yakutat, perhaps by Thursday afternoon. The strongest winds and greatest impact from any weather system in Alaska over the next couple days, probably this storm system again working into the chain and eventually south and western Alaska. Temperatures today, as you well know, across the southern third of the state were very warm. Around the southeast, 40s and 50s for the most part. Sitka was in the mid-40s. It looks like Petersburg, Annette, and Ketchikan anywhere from 44 to 54 degrees. Hyder was showing 45. Juneau in the 40s and 50s today. Haines and Skagway very mild. And in fact, by the end of the day, just before the broadcast, Haines was up to 59. Prince William Sound in the 40s today. Around the Cook Inlet, saw temperatures around 55 in Kenai, 56 in Anchorage, 52 in Talkeetna. 40s and 50s for the interior. Fairbanks made it to 55 today. Eagle was 43. Northway at 52. Farther north still, Fort Yukon was 37. Arctic Village still holding on to temps in the 20s late today. 30 around Anaktuvuk Pass. Ambler and Bettles both in the 40s. Teens along the Arctic coast, 22 in Kaktovik. Kotzebue Sound with some openings there in the ice, it looked like, in the 30s and 40s. 30 around Shishmaref, 40 in Kotzebue, 38 for Kivalina today, 43 in Nome. Unalakleet was showing 46. St. Lawrence Island around 30 degrees. Bethel all the way up to 52 degrees with McGrath at 53. Around Bristol Bay, lower 50s there. Again, ice-free conditions there in Bristol Bay, 41 around Cape Newnham. And the Alaska Peninsula was in the 30s and 40s. One of the colder spots there up around Chignik, while Sand Point was up to 45. False Pass and Cold Bay in the upper 40s. Kodiak Island in the low to mid 40s. And temperatures in the central and western chain in the 30s and 40s with snow showers again around Shemya. Somebody has to have a little snow even in April. Low temperatures overnight in the low to mid 30s for most of west and southwestern Alaska as low pressures pumping in some milder air there. Most areas look to stay at or just above freezing. 39 in Kodiak, upper 30s for the chain. Southeast looking at low temperatures in the mid to upper 30s. North of the Brooks Range, probably still talking about temperatures that are above zero but below freezing, so single digits for most areas. Fairbanks 33, South Central in the low to mid 30s. Places like Seward and Homer probably in the lower to mid 30s as well. Prince William Sound, mid-30s should do the trick, with areas are out around Glen Allen tomorrow, getting very close to 50 degrees. A bright and sunny day for most of south and western Alaska. Upper 40s and low 50s there. 53 in Fairbanks, Northway and Eagle closing in on 50 degrees. Fort Yukon 44. Teens and 20s for the Arctic coast. The Seward Peninsula in the lower 40s with Nunivak Island looking at 38. St. Lawrence, you're looking at about 30 degrees, so still a hair below freezing. 38 around the Pribilofs and low to mid 40s for most of the peninsula and the central and western Aleutians, though Shimmy again holding on to temps just a little bit above freezing. Kodiak 44 and southeast 40s and 50s. Mild for most areas. Flying weather should be just fine across the interior as far as visibility goes, and across southeast things look okay there. Where you're going to run into reduced visibility, of course, is surrounding the storm and the moisture across the Bering. So look for IFR conditions to encroach on the Pribilofs and parts of the Alaska Peninsula, especially the Pacific side, and out around Adak and westward toward Shemya. Other than that, the passes look to be clear, so you can do this with me today. VFR conditions for Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, also for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass. Expect visual flying. Rainy Pass should be VFR all day long. Windy Pass, even with a little bit of sunshine there, I think you should be just fine. VFR conditions there for Isabel Pass and for Tanita Pass. We expect VFR all Wednesday long. Porter's Pass should be a great day to fly in and out of Prince William Sound, and Chilkoot and White Pass at this point expecting VFR conditions. Freezing levels show the change that we've seen with those southerlies blowing all the way up the west coast and over the Seward Peninsula. Here's the surface freezing line running all the way into Kotzebue Sound and then crashing southward over the Kenai Peninsula and then still hugging the coastline pretty much for southeast. Aloft, you see the 2,000-foot freezing line also being pushed well north into the Bering Strait, and we've got a little pocket of warm air there sitting east of Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, and over Kaktovik. That's around 2,000 feet, and some colder pockets here across the central parts of the Aleutians. The really big warmth, though, is still well to our south, but signs of change certainly showing up on the chart. The icing potential also has a little bit of light to isolated moderate, maybe across the Arctic coast, above 4,000 feet but below 10,000 feet, and then below 14 but above 4,000 feet for parts of the southern tip of the peninsula and the eastern chain, and then also some hot spots there out across the western areas of the Bering and the north and western parts of the Gulf of Alaska. The jet stream shows high pressure is in charge there, sitting across the Chukchi Seacoast with more of a northerly flow trying to wrap into the Seward Peninsula, but it's also got its reach stretched into the mainland. So this is really controlling a lot of the weather. The effect is it's steering the active weather pattern well to the south across the North Pacific and into the Pacific Northwest, keeping all of the active weather from making it into Alaska. And as long as this pattern continues, we are going to be mild and dry in most areas, especially the mainland. 9,000 feet shows that south and easterly flow. Pretty light coming up the eastern Gulf, anywhere from 5 to about 15 knots. Light winds across the interior, 10 knots perhaps at most. Low pressure shows its organization there across the southern Bering. The strongest winds are on the south side, coming in from the North Pacific and over the central parts of the chain. Some of those winds already reaching in from the west around 50 to 60 knots. At 3,000 feet, the winds are still picking up some speed there, central and western parts of the North Pacific. And low pressure sitting across the southern Gulf at 3,000 feet, not very strong, so we've got a very light south and easterly flow just kind of meandering its way up across the eastern parts of the Gulf and into south central, maybe at 5 to 10 knots, if that. Very light winds across the interior over Fairbanks, the Tanana Valley, and the Yukon, and then picking up a little bit of speed as it makes its way offshore and across the Bering Strait at 25 knots, and a very light southeasterly flow coming out of the Yukon and into the Beaufort Seacoast, anywhere from 10 to about 25 knots there. Things are pretty quiet across the interior. Turbulence potential, yeah, there's a little bit there. Light to isolated moderate, perhaps across the northern parts of the Yukon and the Beaufort Seacoast, and also across the central Bering Sea around St. Matthew Island waters into Nunivak Island, generally below 6,000 feet, and across the Bristol Bay region, and anywhere from the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula, say from about Sandpoint westward into Adak and Atka, generally below 4,000 feet. You're probably going to run into a little bit of chop with the storm system trying to work its way through the Aleutians and dragging a lot of air with it. All in all, though, things are pretty quiet in the aviation world for most parts of Alaska there. You can always check out these charts anytime you like by going to our TV Desk link. On the left-hand side of your screen, you can click on TV Desk, and then below that you'll be able to look through every single one of these maps after the show if you miss something you like to see. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with an update on your marine weather. Stay tuned.
The flood that buried Fairbanks in water that was 4 to 5 feet deep started on August 8th, 1967.
We had strong southwest flow in August 1967, and this provided a very large area of moisture from the North Pacific and the southern Bering Sea to be lifted up and into interior Alaska. We had a stationary frontal boundary persist across interior Alaska for over a week. So as weather systems moved in off the North Pacific and into the Bering Sea, they moved across this frontal boundary. So we had continuous weather systems moving right across the interior, which kept bringing more and more rainfall to the Fairbanks area.
Now, there are a lot of conditions to help create this extensive, this persistent rainfall. And of course, moisture is one of them. But moisture from a typhoon?
It was Typhoon Hope, which had been spinning around in the western Pacific, got pulled up into this flow, and that warm, moist air from the typhoon got pushed into the interior.
Normally, the Alaska rain prevents a lot of moisture from making its way into the Fairbanks area or into the interior. In August of 1967, that heavy influx of moisture from Typhoon Hope took a different path.
You've got the Alaska Range here, the Brooks Range here. There's really no high terrain here, and that moisture just can slide right in and right into Fairbanks. And when it came along this stationary boundary, and then the hills to our north, you know, all that air had to be lifted up, and it cooled, and it caused it to, enhance the precipitation.
So what was learned as a result of the 1967 flood? Well, it cost $240 million to build, and so far there hasn't been a flood since 1967. The closest Fairbanks came to flooding again was on June 4th, 1992.
The flood control project is upstream of downtown Fairbanks. If the water is expected to reach a certain level in downtown Fairbanks, they'll lower the gates here and start shaving off some of that water. If this floodway fills up all the way, the water will eventually get overtop this sill and go into the Tanana River and be diverted totally around Fairbanks.
Over 12,000 people were evacuated.
It was so strange to see this current going down the street and the boats going by, and then we got to Barnett Street. It was a little different then, but I just remember the rough water.
He thought something was internally wrong. Something had happened inside the house, like a pipe had burst or the sewer had backed up. He had no idea, none of us had any idea that the whole city was flooded. I mean, that was the furthest thing from our mind, thinking about the city flooding. There was no panic. There was just, we got a big problem.
Well, I was almost 5, and I just remember bits and pieces. I remember never being scared and thinking how cool it was watching the water rushing in around the cracks of the front door of our friend's house where we were staying at the time.
The military came and picked us up from our house in a boat. So here's a 4-year-old me sitting on the front of the boat thinking I'm just captain of the world.
There were a lot of very worried people, but everybody was pitching in and helping everybody else.
And then I found out we were actually going to be staying inside a high school on the 2nd floor. It was at Lathrop High School on the 2nd floor, which was a cool thing to me too, because I lived in a 1-story home.
The Lathrop Hilton was very busy, of course, with boats arriving and people coming. They wanted the names of everybody there, and then we were in touch with who was staying out at the universities. Always great confusion.
I remember being lifted out the next day by helicopter to the university from the rooftop. I remember that part, and I remember sleeping on tables up at the, I believe it was the Gruning buildings. The most frightened part, the river had washed the bridge away, and there was a beam that we had to walk across, this raging torrent, and I can remember having to walk across that with my mother and being very frightened. And I remember that being the only real scary part. The rest of it, from a 5-year-old's perspective, was pretty cool.
If I learned anything, it was that there's no need to panic. As long as safety's first, and as long as everyone's safe, the rest is just property.
What makes you stay?
Well, I guess the people. I've always had such a good time here. I enjoyed teaching. I liked it when I worked at the News Miner. I'm involved in lots of things here. I just like the people.
Well, first of all, I talked to some of the old timers, and they said, oh, we'll get maybe a little bit of water in the basement. So I listened to the old timers, but I also, something in my gut told me that this wasn't, this could be a problem.
It was a continuous rain. I mean, there'd be very few breaks.
And this thing came in the night, I got a hold of Bill Wally, and I said, hey, Bill, get on the radio and tell them that we may be having flooding here. And we woke up and the next morning and the city was underwater.
They handed me a sleeping bag and a radio. Safeway was across where the post office is now. They looked like they might have had a half-inch of water in there. They were pumping it out and trying to keep it out.
Was there concern about looting?
Well, there wasn't, To start with, here come two teenagers in a brand new canoe that was loaded to the gunwale. I just picked up the radio and said, what's the procedure on looting? And immediately Red Boucher's voice, the mayor of Fairbanks, came back and said, unhesitatingly said, shoot on sight. And there was no more looting in Fairbanks.
What has stayed with you till now that you can remember about the flood?
20 years of military and especially combat training. If you take action and if you end up with egg all over your face, so you made a mistake. If you don't take action and people lose their lives, you will regret it forever.
The mood of the community when the flood hit.
Fantastic. Probably if you look through the archives, I called it the can-do city. At that particular time of year, we were not that far from freeze-up, and the whole community, from the university, Dr. Wood, everybody just pitched in, and I was very proud of them.
Would you change anything if you went through it today?
Not a bit. No, And I'm just thankful I had that gut instinct to go ahead and do what we did. I live in Anchorage now, but Fairbanks will always be my home of heart. They're just a different bunch of people. True pioneer spirit. So, hey, anything we want, anything we set our mind to do in Fairbanks, we get done.
All right, with all the warmth that we've seen, changes are happening along coastal areas and in the middle of the Bering Sea. That ice edge is eroding and fast. So if you're around Bristol Bay, you already know the water's pretty open there. Some short, fast ice there outside of Bethel and along the upper Kuskokwim coastline. And then as you get up to Nunivak Island around Koryuk, still looking at some patchy areas of ice, and most of that's still pretty thin along that leading edge. We're seeing some open areas there inside of Norton Sound. And we got some pictures today from the Weather Service office around Kotzebue. Charlie Kelly there sent us some areas that look like the ice was sure breaking up fairly quickly there. So the newest ice update will happen tomorrow. Make sure you tune in or check online at weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php for the very latest analysis by late afternoon. We should have that up there. And if you like to make a map like this to track that, we like to use Google Earth, and you can get the shape files that we share there and download that right from our website and make a map very similar to this, or use whatever tools you like to keep track of the ice edge across western Alaska and eventually across the Arctic as well. Here's a look at southeast marine forecast, and as you would expect, winds are pretty light through the next couple of days across the interior. Look for a variable flow, a 10-knot wind with a 2-foot sea. Easterlies there around 10 knots in through Stevens Passage, and 10-knot winds also across some of these southern inner waterways. Coastal areas looking at more of an onshore flow that's fairly light and then turns to the north and west around 15 knots, 10 knots as you head farther south toward the Dixon entrance. 5 to 7-foot seas in most areas there along the coast, and as we get into Thursday, the winds become even more light up around Yakutat and Gustavus. 5 to 10 knot winds there. Seas still up around 6 to 8 feet. In fact, they build a little bit more as you head down toward the Dixon entrance of the northerly flow at 15 knots with 9-foot seas. And in the inner waterways, 10-knot winds. Still looking at 2-foot seas there, but seas and winds are building just a little bit more across some of the southern inner waterways as you get into Thursday. Across South Central, a light and variable flow for most areas. Inside and outside of Prince William Sound, you're looking at 2 to 4-foot seas. An onshore flow into Kodiak there, a 20-knot wind with a 10-foot sea. Inside Shelikof Strait, only 5-knot winds. And more of a southeasterly flow coming across the Barren Islands at 10 to 15 knots. Southwesterlies coming up Cook Inlet around 10 knots with a 2-foot sea. And really not a whole lot of change on Thursday. Looking at a little bit more of a southeasterly push coming into Seward, Resurrection Bay, the Barren Islands, and Kodiak Island, still looking at southeasterlies at 20. Easterlies inside Shelikof Strait with a 2-foot sea, and still looking at that variable flow with nearly flat seas across Prince William Sound. Looks like a gorgeous day there. Easterlies around Bristol Bay on Wednesday. Southeasterlies coming across the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, a southerly flow coming in from the Pacific with an 11 to 14-foot sea on Wednesday. Thursday, that builds a little bit up to 15 to 30 knots. Southeasterlies around Bristol Bay and north of Cold Bay at 20 knots with a 2 to 4-foot sea, 10 to 11-foot seas in the Pacific side. For the chain, a northwesterly flow from Kiska westward around 25 to 30 knots, 8 to 11-foot seas. Westerlies coming across Adak, Atka, Nikolsky, 20 to 30 knots there with the highest seas, of course, on the Pacific side, 16 to 17 feet and 6 to 9 feet across the Bering side at 20 to 25 knots. Thursday, look for a southeasterly push there on Alaska, Nikolsky, And west of Nikolsky, still looking at 11 to 12-foot seas there on the North Pacific side. And the winds are shifting a little bit in response to low pressure moving eastward, so you can get that backing flow there. 25 knots with an 8-foot sea north of Adak and Atka, and still looking at that north and westerly flow from Kiska westward. 20 to 25 knots with 5 to 7-foot seas. Across the west coast now, an offshore flow, 20 to 25 knots, 3 to 6-foot seas from the Kuskokwim Bay all the way up towards St. Lawrence Island in the ice-free areas, of course. Easterlies around the Pribilofs with a 15-knot wind and 7-foot seas, and more of an east to northeasterly flow south of St. Lawrence Island. A little bit of a change there around the Kuskokwim Bay, a southeasterly flow with a 3-foot say, and northeasterlies around the Pribilofs. Here's a look at the Arctic coast. Still looking at ice at this point with winds anywhere from 10 to 20 knots. A general north and easterly wind for just about all areas with the exceptions of areas just north of Kaktovik, 20 knots from the south and east. And then we get more of a broad easterly wind sweeping from Kaktovik all the way to Barrow at 15 to 20 knots. On Thursday, we'll keep our northeasterly winds across the Chukchi seacoast at 15 to 20 knots. So you'll see very little change there as we head into Thursday. Recapping tonight's weather, high and dry and clear and quiet for most areas across the interior and south central Alaska all the way to Kodiak, where we start to see some changes, an option for rain as we head into tonight. For places like Unalaska and the eastern Aleutians, rain will start out kind of in showery form, as you've seen probably on and off all day, but the precipitation and the intensity may pick up a little bit more as we head into the early morning hours of Wednesday. Scattering of rain and snow across the Bering Sea and maybe some areas across the southwestern coast up into the Bering Strait and out across southeast, some possibilities for some rain showers across northern parts of southeast into the Copper River Basin, and that's where we may see that mix in a little bit more with rain and snow. Chance for some light rain across northern parts of southeast and Kodiak Island tomorrow. Coastal areas across the Bering may see some pockets of rain and snow. Most of that should be showery and passing. Low pressure starts to fall apart across the southern Bering Sea. A new storm tries to take place as we head into Thursday afternoon, and scattered rain showers across south central. Thanks for watching. Enjoy your evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.